Well, chaps, excuse the wet dog approach, but I was thinking to myself about not doing any videos until the Battle of Britain starts, which apparently is July 10th, according to Wikipedia. I always figured that it was around about the 14th with the launch of Adlertag. Either way, July now in 1940 is where things are starting to gear into action. It's entirely possible that July is as good as Hitler gets. By that I mean what I'm going to try and talk about. Today on July 6th, 80 years ago anyway, Hitler has returned to Berlin as a conquering hero, and the crowds are out in force. If you look online, there's several photos, certainly, of Hitler's motorcade coming down various streets in Berlin on his way to the Chancellery or whatnot. And they're all chanting and all, Sieg Heil and all this stuff. And it's incredible, really, when you take into... trying to sit comfortably. If you take into account just how Berliners were with the Nazis. Berlin was, and until the end of the war, never a Nazi stronghold. If anything, Berliners were more socialist, more left-leaning, then they were inclined to vote for National Socialism. I never can remember the election results accurately, but certainly in 1933, Berlin did not overwhelmingly vote for the NSDAP, to give them a proper acronym. Excuse me. So it makes it all the more intriguing on July 6th that they came out in force. Now, arguably, of course, inarguably, Nazi Germany was a dictatorship. So there were probably a great many people that came out against their will, their block Führer in their apartment buildings coming, knocking on the door saying, look, you better turn out for the Führer or I'll dob you into the Gestapo. It sounds piffy, but in apartment buildings, flats as we call them here, there were like these block Führers, I guess the Nazi equivalent of a caretaker or landlord, who would inform on you if you were not seen to be kowtowing to the party line. And yet, not every single person that came out on July the 6th, 1940, were overwhelmingly in favour of the Nazis, or had been told to come out because of the Nazis. In a sense, the Victory Parade of July 6, 1940 was very much German, in that France had been for some time now the old enemy, the Franco-Prussian War of 1871, the last war of 1914-18. There were various grievances and miscarriages of justice in the German eyes from the last war, still lingering, of course, in the conscious memory. That's a whole raison d'etre of the Nazi movement in a way. But they were the old enemy, they were conquered. And now, all of a sudden, against many Berliners' expectations, hope, or whatever, Germany now stood with a foot on the soil, the beaches of the English Channel. They were all the way up to the Arctic Circle, all the way down to Bordeaux, and technically the south of France, if we include Vichy France. They were extending into the east. Poland no longer existent. It was now the general government. And they were looking at England. Now, I am sure many Germans in Berlin, certainly in 1940, were thinking to themselves, well, this is it. That's it, we've done it. We've knocked out the French. The British aren't going to do anything anytime soon. If we're going to invade, if they were thinking of invading England, Berlin's, we'll do it all right. Look, the Führer, for as much as we don't like him, the fact that he looks like Charlie Chaplin in a rather poor waiter in a poor restaurant, has delivered on his promises. France is beaten. The British have fled for their lives. And yet, of course, behind the scenes, Hitler is still sort of leaning towards, Britain is not our natural enemy and all this stuff. But this is quite possibly the only time in the war, the last time in the war certainly, that Berliners came out like they did. It's incredible. I mean, there was various things going on at the Sports Palace and elsewhere during the Battle of Britain. Hitler's let them we're coming speech of just before September 1940. in contrast to the rest, Hitler was not was not a present leader to the public. London, Birmingham, Manchester, Plymouth, Portsmouth and elsewhere got bombed. Indeed, the Plymouth Blitz started today on July the 6th, 1940. Cardiff got bombed a few days ago. Churchill, at the very least, and other leaders in Britain at least came out to see the damage. The royal family came out. They went out to the East End to much detriment, in a way, as well as jubilation. Hitler, when the going got tough, never was seen at Hamburg after the disaster there, in the German mindset anyway, and never was at Dresden or Cologne or anywhere else. He was never... Gradually, as the war wore on, Hitler was heard but not seen. I think January 1945 was the last time he broadcast to the Third Reich, such as it was. Would it have made any difference? I don't know. The Germans fought rather tenaciously in the east, all the way into the ruins of Berlin. But that was because of what they did in the east and now what the Russians were going to do. Would Hitler turning up at Hamburg, say in 1943, I guess like certain world leaders presently, he doesn't want to show his face in case he gets booed or shouted at. But either way, July 6, 1940 sort of represents an idea of the Third Reich. The invasion of Russia sort of greeted in Berlin rather mootly in some respects, like what the hell have we let ourselves in for? And I'd imagine a feeling or some hope, as quite honestly they went through Russia like a knife through butter until the winter of 1941-42 started, and then of course they made gains in 42. 1942 was quite possibly the last time Adolf Hitler had a chance of winning the war. America not yet lent her rate to the war in Europe in heavy numbers. They were involved, of course, in the summer of 1942, but things take time. I mean, I was reading Max Hastings' book about Operation Chastiser, Dam Busters Raid, in other words, and how there was the chief of the air staff based in Washington, and Churchill, I think, was in Washington in May 43, and this was seen as, in some respects, the last thing that the British could sort of claim as their own, and they soon became a junior partner, as Churchill called it. But the Americans at the time were again rather huffy that the British, in the shape of Churchill and Allenbrook, the Chief of the Imperial General Staff, as we used to call it, SIGs, now it's just Chief of the General Staff, so I don't know if they still call him SIGs, were digging their toes in the sand for a second front in 1943. They were saying to the Americans, basically, it's not a good idea. And they were right to hold out to 44. Invasion in 43 could have gone wrong for all manner of reasons, and they hadn't time to build things up properly. So there's that to bear in mind. Otherwise, Europe, I'm sure Berliners are thinking to themselves, well, that's it. Nothing more to worry about, we've knocked out. And like I say, they were never the Nazis' biggest lovers. The Nazi base, to use a modern expression, was Munich, Nuremberg. It was basically Bavaria and other parts of Germany, but Berlin was never. And if I remember an episode of World at War, when the tanks and lorries were coming through Berlin to the east to invade Poland, Berlin has just watched it with silence, and nothing the Nazis could have done could have G'd these Berliners up to support them. And indeed, come that early part of July, Hitler, on July the 2nd, and I'm going to refer to William L. Shire's tome, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich. It's worth a read if you're interested. He was a correspondent still in Berlin when this was going on. I think he was kicked out in late 41, of course. He said, all through the last fortnight of June and the first days of July, Hitler waited for a word from London that the British government was ready to throw in the sponge and conclude peace. On July the 1st, he told the new Italian ambassador, Dino Alfieri, that he could not conceive of anyone in England still seriously believing in victory. Nothing had been done in the High Command about continuing the war against Britain. But the next day, July the 2nd, the first directive on that subject was finally issued by OKW, and OKW were the Oberkommando Wehrmacht, so the Armed Forces High Command. It was a hesitant order, and it quotes, "The Führer and Supreme Commander has decided that a landing in England is possible, providing that air superiority can be attained and certain other necessary conditions fulfilled. The date of commencement is still undecided, all preparations to be begun immediately." And then it goes, Hitler's lukewarm feeling about the operation and his belief that it would not be necessary is reflected in the concluding paragraph of the directive. All preparations must be undertaken on the basis that the invasion is still only a plan and has not yet been decided upon. And of course, Chiano, he says he is rather inclined to continue the struggle and to unleash a storm of wrath still upon the English, but the final decision has not yet been reached, and it is for this reason that he is delaying the speech, of which, as he himself puts it, he wants to weigh every word. That is a subject for another video, really, Hitler and the invasion of Britain. Supposedly from day one of World War II, he was still very much in mind of peace of Britain. He didn't think they would join in. They did on September the 3rd, 1939. The invasion is awfully fascinating in many, many, many ways. Would it have worked? If it had worked, what would have happened? Was Hitler serious about it? Were the armed forces ever going to carry it out seriously? Because they didn't seem to. Well, Rader certainly wasn't convinced by it. From Brauchitsch and all the rest of it. There were all these plans, and yet, if you look at it on a bare level, the Germans were making plans for what would have happened in the event of a German invasion and occupation of Great Britain. The France 6 was going to command the Einsatzgruppen with bases in the likes of London, Manchester, Edinburgh and so on to round up the 300,000 Jews that were living in Britain at the time. There were going to be all sorts of nasties taking place. As I said, that's another video. So, next one should be about the start of the Battle of Britain. I don't know what we're going to do for that one. Just a few words, hopefully. But July 1940 is a seminal moment in British history, certainly, and world history. The world is watching Britain, the free world at any rate. Are they going to carry on, as Churchill claims, or what is Nazi Germany going to do? Only a few days ago now, Britain has destroyed the French fleet, most of it anyway, at Oran. Are they going to keep fighting on? What are they going to do next to ensure their survival? Well, as many people said in the summer of 1940 to each other, to famous writers like C.S. Lewis, we're in the final now, and we're on home turf. It sums it up in a rather minute and very British way. We're not going to roll over for Adolf Hitler. And if he comes knocking, we'll go down fighting. That was the hope. Whether we're in practice, we would have fought to the end, but then just got on with it, collaborated, ensured our survival through other ways is open for debate. That's the wonderful thing about history. It teaches us more about ourselves now, in some respects, than the past. So that's it for now, chaps. Thanks very much.